effect, and it took me a while. Hey, you know what? It sounded familiar, and I couldn't remember. Why does that sound so familiar? Because, of course, it's a Star Trek movie that they had the Genesis effect. And I love it. It's, I think one of the lines was, "It literally is something from nothing." I thought that was interesting. So, but the Genesis effect, and what I wanted to do is kind of survey Genesis. Oh, excuse me. If I don't bring my security blanket, then I need it. So I wanted to kind of survey Genesis because we're in this study, and where's Xavier? So we were talking about this chart in the fellowship room, and I've been, everybody's threatening they're going to erase the board in there, and it's okay because I have it. It's all outlined. We're very close to producing this, but I've asked different people for some ideas, and I hope this morning maybe this kind of stimulates your mind into thinking how we can graphically illustrate the beginning, because Genesis literally is the beginning of all things, especially for the Christian to have a renewal. And so Peter in particular, this scripture verse, 2 Peter 1, 3 and 4, has been kind of the theme as we started the school year with our classes here. And right following this, Peter gives this list of virtues and how they all build and interact with each other. Build your faith, supplement your faith with these virtues. And, knowledge is important. You need to have knowledge, but then that knowledge needs to produce something. And so Peter, I've said this before, Peter's letters are really a snapshot or a commentary on the whole Bible. It's amazing. The more that you put all these pieces together, the more profound all the individual scriptures become as they kind of interact. Let me read this again and think of it in terms of the Genesis effect. 2 Peter 1, verses 3 and 4. And again, I'm going to read it from the English Standard Version, so slightly different than what was read earlier, but it says, "His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire." Now again, as we've been going through these various studies during the week, one of them we've been talking about, John's first letter, 1 John, the whole thesis or theme or point of the letter is fellowship with God is life. And so we're in Genesis now on Sunday morning, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of put Genesis in a survey, and let's put it in the framework of this Genesis effect. If you don't understand Genesis, if you don't accept God's word, then nothing else in the Bible really is ever going to come together and make sense. And so what we're given in Genesis, also this is a preview because coming up in our study on Sunday morning, we're going to show the Genesis movie. And I think that's coming up maybe 2 weeks from now. Is Genesis history. We're going to put that in while we're in the flood narrative during Genesis. But up to the flood, so in Genesis chapters 1 through 9, what we have is we have in the beginning God, I like that. If you get that, everything else falls into place. You can't see God if you don't accept him. In the beginning, God. We have the creation. Linda, there's going to be a bunch of C's this morning. So we have the first three in Genesis 1 through 9 is we have the creation, and right away corruption, which leads to a calamity. It's going to culminate, forgive me, it's going to culminate in the flood and this complete God, as we read this morning, grieving in his heart that he ever created man in flesh, and he's going to start over. But right from the beginning, so this Genesis effect, so we go back and we say, okay, at some point you have to realize things aren't working out so well. At some point in our lives, say, the path I'm on is not producing joy in my life. And we hear people say it's a rat race. You start just doing things for the sake of doing things, and you're not connected to any why. And Q mentioned that this morning. We love to know why. What's my motivation? And a lot of times, for whatever reason, our life gets so busy and we get separated from that, and we just do things as they come. But then one day, and he's not here, I can't make fun of him now, that this song that kind of rolls around, and Q always chuckles when he hears it, that Talking Head song. Man, how did I get here? Right? Yeah. It's just one day you wake up and you say, man, a whole section of my life just went by. What just happened? And a lot of times, for families, we say the empty nesters, when your kids grow up and they move out, then all of a sudden you're like, now what do we do? Everything was so fast paced. So we have students now in school, and their whole world has changed. And now their bodies are, revolting. Anytime you go through a massive change in your lifestyle, right, it has effects on you, and now we got to find a way to adapt to this new setting. Genesis, let me lay this out. Here's the byline, Linda. Genesis effect is the pattern that points to a path. So people say, why are we reading Genesis? Why do I need to know this? Because the Genesis effect is going to set the course right for us in our minds so that we get on the right path. Right from the beginning in the creation, chapter 3, we call it the fall. There's a certain condition that's laid down. Adam and Eve don't follow that. And now there's this corruption and there's this separation. And in Genesis chapter 3:15 is the first indication that all is not right in the world. And in that verse, there's this Hebrew word that the ESV translates is enmity. In fact, I need a marker here. Let me go back to Genesis 3:15. Because remember, after God steps in, he says, what is going on here? What have you done? And everybody's passing the buck. She did it. No, she says he did it. And God starts pronouncing this judgment. And in 3:15, he's going to say to the serpent, Genesis 3:15 is, maybe I said that right, but it's this first in a line we call the seed line promise that the Bible's going to pick up and set this course. But it says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And it seems an odd, like we were saying this morning, right? There's things written in this narrative that are just stuck in there, and then we move on, and it's easy for us to read over that and say, well, okay, what does that mean? Enmity, that word, that Hebrew word, quite literally is hatred. In other words, God says, there's going to be hate. Now listen, there's a difference between God so loved the world. God loves you and wants this fellowship. But it got ruptured here. Now you're going to choose in this life, this path. And one is with a God who loves you and demonstrates his love. The other one does not want you on his side because he loves you. He hates God. And when you choose to side with that, you might think, oh, well, he's just going to take me in and give me all these wonderful things. That's the allure. He hates you as much as he hates God. That enmity is hatred. In fact, Jesus said, and again, we'll allude to this, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Again, Matthew 6:24, Jesus says, he gives that, he talks about all the things in this life, and he says, listen, you got to choose. You love the one and hate the other, but you cannot serve two masters. It's this love-hate. One is love. And we've been talking a lot about that because we're in 1 John. And John, who is one of the apostles who transformed from what we call the son of thunder to this apostle of love. How does that happen? Because of this renewal of choosing the right path. Again, it's going to be reiterated, as we mentioned last week, but in this interaction in the next chapter, Genesis chapter 4, with Cain and Abel, and then God is pleased with Abel but not Cain, and he's upset about this, and God pronounces this to Cain. He says in verse 4:7, Hebrews 4:7, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. You must master it. Now, here's one of the things that we need to be reminded of over and over again, is there's a choice because there's an adversary. It's not just, oh, do I pick the right path? There's an instigator, an advocate, someone that hates God, that does not want you to seek this path. When God says to Cain, you must rule over, you must master it, that's work. You want to find joy in your life? Go to work. Joy does not come when you just sit there and say, why is everything bad happening to me? You got to do something. I remember a motivational speaker, he didn't like somebody say, he used to use this graphic. I just thought it was funny, but he said, you can't just jump up and down on your chair and say, I like myself, I like myself. Put those positive affirmations. He says, you got to do something that makes you want to like yourself. Change. Something's got to be different in your life to motivate you to come out of this spiral that we get ourselves into. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new energy that we have. There's a God that wants to give you this abundant life, but our own mind starts to work on us and self-defeat us and say, oh no, the reason why you're not happy or you're not getting what you want is because others, it's because others. And I love, one of my teachers used to say, the winds of this life blow the same on everyone. It's the set of the sail, right? The set of the sail makes the difference. How can some people prosper? These are such awful times, and if I like the book I gave you, Oh Baby, the Places You'll Go. But we love that Dr. Seuss story, Oh, the Places You'll Go, because he goes through all these trials in life, and one day you just got to pick yourself up. You have to make a choice that this is not working out. I need to do something different. Listen, Jesus put it this way. He says, here's the path. On the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 7, 21 through 23. Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself. I'm in the wrong place. Okay, hold on. Hold that thought. I lost my place. Creation, corruption, calamity. Why did the calamity come? We're getting into that now. We're in Genesis 6 and 7, and now we're going to get into the flood narrative. And we were talking about this morning. God grieves in his heart. There's a command that God gave us. Work this out, master it. But we don't do so well. And it culminates in this calamity and this flood. And God's going to start over with Noah. Now, when he starts over with Noah, 3 more C's, Linda, he's now going to give a command. And again, this is our process. Command, confusion, and then comes the call. So Noah and his family get off the ark, and God reiterates the command he gave to Adam, right? You now go, be fruitful and multiply, okay? All replenish the earth. So the ark became the seed that's going to start the new civilization. So there's a command, but also God gave a covenant. And his covenant with Noah and his family and all of them on the ark that are going to go out, he puts a rainbow. He puts a bow there. And one of the reasons that God does this is he demonstrates to us and for all time that he is a promise keeper. He says, I'm never going to do this again. I'm never going to destroy the world. In other words, no matter how bad you get, we're going to work this out. So he gives them the command again, go out and multiply. Whenever we're given a command, we're given instruction, right? That always carries some kind of expectation with it. And we're very good at getting confused about that. So we have a command, and I said, when we're looking back and we're trying to learn these lessons, the one thing, men might say in our retreat, Mary, is, you were serious about that? We have to endure the consequences a lot of times before we kind of, now I get it. So we have a command, there's an expectation, but we get confused about it. So this time, God does something else. And we call it the call. God's going to demonstrate to us and work this out with individuals. And it starts in Genesis chapter 12. We call it the call because what is it? It's the call of Abraham. God's going to take the life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he's going to work through them, and he tells us what he's going to do. He says, I've given you instruction. Now I'm going to show you how. And what we have in the remainder of Genesis, from chapter 12 moving forward, is this character contrast. God interacting with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Are those 3 perfect men? No. It's a contrast. God gives them instructions. I got a better idea, God. I'll do it my way. There's consequences. Then they come back, oh God, help me out of this. We see a pattern there. What does God want from us? All the while, God's saying, trust me. Listen. So he contrasts this. Now, he's going to provide these conditions. So through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, here's what happens. He creates these circumstances because, again, he's now going to instruct us. He doesn't leave us like that. Psalm similar to this morning. Who's the king? You are the King of glory. He says, the psalmist would say, who is man that you're mindful of him? Why are you doing this? Because I love you, God might say. But he creates these circumstances for, forgive me, this is phonetic, prophecy, famine, and Pharaoh. Nah, prophecy. God's going to lay things out because, again, he's going to create circumstances. God says, I'm not going to leave this to chance. I'm going to call Abraham, and I'm going to work out a system so that man can learn by it. Because, again, this is the pattern. It's the Genesis effect. It's going to cast. So here's what he does. He provides the conditions. Now, Exodus is going to play out the process, but he's going to demonstrate his righteousness. And what he does, how he does this in Genesis, in chapter 15, verses 13 through 14, he says, the Lord said to Abraham, listen, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Okay. So, we're seeing this process unfold where God gives instructions and we goof it up. That's the process. Here's the command. We get confused about it. So God says, listen, all right, I'm going to call Abraham and I'm going to set some things in motion. And he foretells this. So again, his promises are reliable. And so he says, this is how you're going to have to trust me on this. How many times do you have to get in trouble? Well, Israel's a pretty good example of stiff-necked people, Marion, right? They're stiff-necked people that I keep telling you. And he said, when he sent Ezekiel to him, he says, I'm going to make Ezekiel's head like cement because their head is like cement. You got to have a hard head, because these are hard-headed people. What he's showing us, remember, this is a pattern that points to a path. That's a process for sinful man to serve a holy God. We're going through this Exodus, and we're looking at God's build. He tells them, he gives Moses instruction on the mountain, and Moses communicates it to Israel. They're now out in the wilderness, and they're to build this tabernacle in the wilderness, and it's going to represent God's going to be with them. He's got to have a pillar of smoke and fire in the middle of their congregation, and he's showing them how they come and how they're going to come before the God who wants fellowship with them. But they have to make sacrifices. Why? Because they have to be clean. Why? Because God is altogether righteous, and you have to be holy to be with the holy God. And so there's this process unfolds. But it also shows, through the dealings of Israel, it shows our desperate need for a Redeemer. We can't get this right. I mentioned Peter, right? When Peter comes along, competent fisherman, knows his business, has people that look up to him, respect him, ask for advice. He's really good at giving advice. All of a sudden, he joins Jesus, and everything he says and does, he's wrong. How many of us would keep going under those circumstances? Or we just say, that's too hard. Why do I want to be humiliated this way? Well, because it's just everything. This path is just everything. But in this education process of God illustrating what he wants from us through Israel, we see this need for a Redeemer to restore what was lost. Now, here's what I want to say, Mary, right, in our study, and Alice and Jordan, right? We talk about this on Wednesday night. One of the things, we talk about this fellowship with God is life. One of the things that was lost in the garden and what God is doing, he's demonstrating how to get it back. But how is it broken? This is very interesting. The serpent came in and deceived man and said, if you would take from this tree of knowledge, then you could be like God, knowing good and evil. The truth was, Adam had fellowship with God. He was deceived and he gave up what he already had. Let that sink in, because I'm looking for ways to kind of motivate us, especially men in particular, because we're thick-headed and stubborn, and we want to do things our own way, and it's hard for us to accept. One of the things to accept you're on the wrong path and get on the right path is admitting you're wrong. That's not an easy thing to do. We say, oh yeah, I'm transparent, I could do that. I might say it, but do I really act it out? So now the pattern has been established, and it's all set forth in Genesis. And you get to the New Covenant in the New Testament, and the first thing we see is a voice crying in the wilderness. And what does he say? Mark 1:3. Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. Here's the path. There's a path. We need to get on it. Now, Jesus, sorry I jumped ahead before. Jesus, on the Sermon on the Mount, it is chapter 7, but it's verses 13 and 14. Listen, it's one we know really well, but boy, we can't hear it enough because we quickly forget this. Jesus says, enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. Listen, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life. And those who find it are few. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm going to say it again. You got to work if you want to have joy. There's an adversary, wants you on a different path. Choosing this path is a narrow gate. Jesus said it's hard, but it's life. I have a teacher who said, it's just everything, right? It's just everything. Maybe because we're a little hard-headed. Maybe Jesus needs to be more direct. So when he's speaking to his apostles in John chapter 14, verse 6, another verse we know so well, Jesus, remember, he's having this conversation, and they say, well, how do we know where you're going, Jesus? How do we know the way? Well, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Everything we've been talking about, this syncretism, dualism, what gets us in trouble in this world is what I already know prevents me from learning something new. That's my problem. I know this is the Word of God. I'm going to work it out my way. I'm not going to sing the song. But we love it. And we want to feel like, oh, I'm doing something. Jesus said, I'm the way, truth, and the light. So listen. Saul of Tarsus, very competent. Another competent, confident man who believed with a clear conscience he's doing right. We see him in Acts chapter 9, and that's the chapter where is his conversion. But listen to how it's worded. So Saul is seeking letters from the synagogue, or from the Sanhedrin. He's seeking letters to go to these synagogues in Damascus. And what's he want to do? He says, so that if he found any belonging to the way, because that's what they called it then, the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. What way? Well, this path to righteousness that John the Baptist said, he's preparing the way. Now, got to listen to Jesus, the one who comes. So, when Paul now is recounting the story to Felix in Acts chapter 24, in 24:14, Paul says, "But this I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets." So we say, Saul does a 180. He goes from persecuting the church to proclaiming the church. And he calls it the way. Twice, exactly the same. Proverbs 14:12 and 16:25. I like it's on your bulletin today, a little wisdom from Proverbs. But there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. There's only one way to the Father. It's through Jesus. If we can accept him and get into this Genesis effect. There is an easy way. Let me put it this way. There's an easy way and there's the right way. The Creator sets the conditions and decides the conclusion. Now, listen to this. Having said all that, listen to these words now. 2 Peter 1:3 and 4. His divine power has granted to us all things pertaining to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his own glory and excellence, by which he has granted to us his precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. What Peter's going to go on to say is, now, you want to stay there? Go to work. Work on your faith. Supplement your faith. Get more knowledge. Because you need to start exercising some self-control. So the question comes up in our study then, well, can I do all these things that I did before? This one came up with our students, and I love it. Is Peter in his first letter, and which he begins that one. He says, you got to be born again of this imperishable seed. Not the perishable seed, the genealogies that we're going through in Genesis, but the imperishable seed, the Word of God. Now, and he gets to chapter 4, 1 Peter chapter 4, 3 and 4. For the time past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. Remember Peter, that fisherman? With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. You know why this is hard? Because we're comfortable in this world, and when we start to separate ourselves from it, people don't like it. Makes other people feel uncomfortable. Oh, come on, Mark. We're going out. No, I'm not going. And some had said, well, I'm not ready to look at the Bible, and because I don't want to be accountable. Because you Christians just do things, you don't want to have fun. And the song says, I'd rather die with the sinners than live with the saints. Oh, no. The abundant life and joy comes from being renewed and get back what was lost. A divine nature and fellowship with God for eternal glory. Thank you so much. We're gonna chart this out. So I hope it inspired some thinking as we start putting this visually on a chart to help remind us the Genesis effect. Let's get in the way. If you're not in the way, that's what the invitation song is, to come up and make your request known.